Thank you, Your Grace, for taking time out of your very busy schedule to be with us today. Your Grace, your work has helped many people understand better the Orthodox Church and its wonderful tradition, and is quite often recommended reading for someone who would like to convert to our faith. What people may not know is your own personal journey to the Orthodox faith. Could you share with us what led you to the Orthodox faith?
Gladly. I was a child of English parents. I was brought up in the Anglican Church, and I have always very grateful memories of my Anglican upbringing. How did I first get to know about orthodoxy? I'd like to mention 3 steps. First, when I was at school, about 16 years old, I happened to go into a bookshop in London and buy a book called The Desert Fathers by Helen Waddell. Why I bought it, I don't remember, but it fascinated me. I read the texts concerning the early monks in the desert, particularly of Egypt, Nitria and Scetis, the book known in Greek as the Gerontikon, short anecdotes with sharp, often paradoxical points. I felt here is a world I must know more about. That was a first beginning of interest in the Christian East. Then, when I was 17, just before I went up to university, one Saturday afternoon in London, I happened to go inside a church where I'd never been before. I didn't go planning this in advance. I was on a walk. I noticed the church, felt, what is happening inside here? There wasn't a proper church notice board outside. It was a big 19th century Victorian Gothic building. A hot summer afternoon, bright sunshine outside, but when I went inside the church, it was dark and cavernous. My first impression was that this church was completely empty. I got the impression of a huge expanse of polished floor, no pews. Then I realized the church wasn't altogether empty. There were icons, a few worshippers close to the icons. Somewhere out of sight a choir was singing. Then I noticed the icon screen, and from behind the icon screen a deacon emerged to do a litany. And my first impression that the church was completely empty was succeeded by a second impression that it wasn't empty at all, that it was full of invisible worshippers, unseen presences. I felt that we, this small congregation, had been taken up into an action much greater than ourselves. I had a feeling, if you like, of heaven on earth, the presence of the invisible church of the communion of saints. This was in fact the Russian church in London, the only Russian church at that time. And they were having, according to the Russian pattern, the Saturday evening vigil service. I didn't understand one word because it was all in Slavonic, but in a strange way I felt immediately, this is for me. This is where I belong. How is it? It happens in other ways too in our life, that before we know fully about something, we are yet convinced that this is where our path lies. I wouldn't say I went out of that church consciously wishing to be a member of orthodoxy. But I think really from that moment my future path was decided. And I shall not forget this sense first of emptiness and then of fullness. When years later I read the account of the conversion of the Russians, I read how Prince Vladimir of Kiev sent envoys to Constantinople, how they attended the liturgy at St. Sophia, how on their return they told Prince Vladimir, we didn't know whether we were in heaven or on earth. When I read all that years later, I started with amazement, because in a much humbler way, such had been my experience. Then a third stage, 2 years after that, by this time I was a student at university studying ancient languages, classical Greek and Latin. I went for the first time to Greece. And my friends said, let's go on a tour of the Peloponnese, and let's go to Sparta. I said, why go to Sparta? The Spartans went in for gymnastic exercises, but they didn't leave any beautiful monuments. In fact, we were going to see the city of Mistra. And this made a deep impression on me. A complete city, castle at the top, deserted streets. But above all, I was struck by the churches, which there are still many surviving, still in use as churches, and decorated with frescoes of a very high quality. 14th, 15th century, the last flowering of the Byzantine Empire. And that was my first encounter with Byzantium. And that again confirmed my feeling, this is where my true home lies. But it was the Saturday evening service that was the most important. My initial contact with orthodoxy was not through books, nor through meeting individual Orthodox, but through the experience of worship. Because of my training in classical languages, because of my feeling also that I wanted to go back to the sources, I didn't in fact join the Russian church, I joined the Greek diocese in Britain. I was received at the Greek cathedral there. But I've always felt nourished both by the spirituality of the Greek patristic tradition and by Russian spirituality and the Russian spirit of prayer. I wouldn't want to contrast them. Mm-hmm. When you go to the depths of either tradition, you are struck at once by what they have in common. So that was my first beginning. But I waited for 6 years from the moment I'd first entered an Orthodox church before I was received. It wasn't so easy to be Orthodox in Britain then. There wasn't a single Orthodox parish at that time which in its Sunday worship used any English at all. And the Greek bishop I approached was very cautious. But I understand that. He didn't want to receive people unless he felt that he could care for them pastorally.